Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. I hope you're having a great day so far and welcome to today's video where I'm going to be sharing all of my thoughts, a demo and some comparisons on the new Snake palette from Hourglass for holiday. This is Hourglass week here on my channel, but if you are sick to death of hearing about these palettes, don't worry, this is the last video. This is the last palette that I plan to pick up from this collection. So without further ado, let's get started. Okay, so just the same as yesterday where I shared all of my thoughts on the Jellyfish palette, today's video will follow the exact same format as that. I'm going to be showing you this Snake palette in action on my skin, and then I will jump into all of the comparisons that I have to my existing Hourglass Ambient Lighting collection, including that Jellyfish palette. And I've added an additional palette by request over on my Instagram. This is the Diffused Rose edit, which was like a limited edition palette. I think it was earlier on this year, that has a blush highlight that we can compare everything to as well. So that will be at the end of the video, but let's take a look at this Snake palette. So this is the one that I was the most excited for. This looks like all of the shades are right up my street. This is also the palette with the most new shades for this collection. 5 out of the 6 shades in this palette are brand new. Only one existing shade, and that is the Finishing Powder Radiant Light, which is an existing permanent shade of Hourglass's ambient lighting powders. We then have that beautiful blush Coral Haze. We have the metallic strobe powder, Infinite Strobe Light. We have the blush Sunbeam, another blush Mystic Flush, and then a new bronzer, Solar Bronze. So the first thing I notice is, without doubt, this palette is a lot deeper and richer than the Jellyfish palette. As you can see, much richer and deeper, and it also has an additional blush instead of having the 2 finishing powders, which I love. That's right up my street. We also have one of the strobe lighting blushes in here. Mystic Flush is one of the strobe formulas. Yesterday in the Jellyfish, the overall palette was a little more matte than what I'm used to with these palettes. They were all like ambient lighting powders, none of the strobe formulas for the cheap products. And unusually for Hourglass, the bronzer was described as a matte bronzer. To me, it was a much more luminous matte than just a flat matte. But in here, all of these powders, as you may notice from the swatches, are much more glowy and more like typical for Hourglass. The bronzer looked very glowy. Even the finishing powder is more of a luminous finishing powder, and these blushes look gloriously sheeny, which is right up my street. So all in all, I'm much more excited for this palette. Of course, this is the exact same price point as yesterday, £86, $90. All of these palettes are limited edition and they all have the same amount of product, 6 pans of 1.4 grams, exactly the same as last year, exactly the same packaging as we said yesterday, with the annoying won't stand up by itself lid, but a good size mirror, so you know, pros and cons. Before we jump into the demo with this palette, I just wanted to touch on availability and just how limited edition or not these palettes may be. I've had a lot of people saying, do I think they can wait for sale? Do I think these will be coming to other retailers? So Hourglass did confirm they will be coming to their retailers. I think in the next week or 2, we will see them popping up at different retailers. However, the availability, it's such a tough question. I think if you really want one of these palettes and you're going to be devastated if they go away forever, then I'm not 100% confident that you can wait for a sale, particularly when it comes to this palette, the Snake palette. Again, we're kind of guessing, it's an educated guess, but based on last year and the popularity of the Tiger palette, which was the deepest, the richest, the one with the most new shades in it, just like Snake is this year, the one with the most new shades in it, I wouldn't rely on being able to wait for a sale. It could be that Hourglass have got a lot more stock of these palettes given how popular they were last year, but they also might not have done, and they also may sell out just as quickly as they did last year, and those palettes haven't come back either. So it's risky. Waiting for sale is risky. It could pay off and you could get a bargain, a deal, or they could go out of stock before that happens, especially what I believe will be the most popular palette. Of course, we know now that you can mix and match. You can get the jellyfish, I want to say octopus every time, is that just me? You can get the jellyfish colour story but in the snake packaging, or you can add the owl packaging. That isn't a standalone palette, that is just a standalone packaging option. But I have kept my palettes as they come. These are the standard jellyfish and snake palettes because I thought it would be really confusing if I customized it. We could get confused as to which palette I was using. So this is the snake colour story in the snake packaging as it comes without the customization, just to clarify. Okay, so let's jump into the demo and try this snake palette out on my skin. I'm so excited. I washed my hair yesterday and then I slept with it in a bun. So it is wild, okay? We're gonna have to just temporarily tame it back there, or it's going to take over this whole video. I have so many Hourglass palettes on my desk right now. I'm terrified I'm going to pick up and use the wrong one. Definitely Snake. So we're going in, same brush that I used yesterday. It works so nicely, the Sonia G Hinoki brush. This is just the perfect size. I think I've probably picked up a bit too much of this bronzer, given that it is richer and deeper, but we're going to see what happens, okay? We're going to start lightly up on the forehead. Okay, so we got away with it. We got away with it. These Hourglass bronzers, always really blendable, pretty mistake and foolproof. I would say, you guys know I've said this before, I'm very heavy-handed when it comes to my cheek products. I try not to be, but I just can't help it and swirl my brush in the product. I just love a good swirl. And sometimes it can cause me issues, but these bronzers, blushes from Hourglass, they're pretty mistake proof, they're pretty idiot proof, they're pretty beginner friendly. I feel like they're easy to use, easy to get away with, you know, some dodgy application. So that's ideal for me. This bronzer is definitely a little richer and I think a little cooler than yesterday's bronzer from the Jellyfish palette. I did mention that that was probably one of the least orangey bronzers I've ever tried from Hourglass. I think typically in these palettes they tend to be super duper warm, and yesterday's was definitely leaning a bit more neutral, and I think this bronzer is leaning even more neutral than that one, and it's definitely glowier. I think we'll see that when we come to the comparison swatches at the end. Giving me lots of glow to the skin. I have a pretty matte foundation on today. I used the Hourglass foundation shade 10.5 for color reference, and so this is the only real glow coming from my cheeks, is coming from this bronzer. And because of that slightly sort of cooler tone of bronzer, it's definitely giving me like quite a sculpted look to my bronzer today, which I love. I love that kind of more neutral, cooler bronzer that kind of sculpts everything out. Beautiful. Okay, moving on to the highlighter. Oh, that is the highlighter. Yes, the highlighter, and using my Sonia G Fan Pro, exactly the same brush as yesterday. And I'm hoping this highlight, yes, is going to mount into the skin a little better than yesterday's did. It's still a very bright, quite metallic highlighter. For me, that's pretty full on for a highlighter. I do typically prefer a more soft, luminous highlighter. These are definitely metallic, but this one definitely suits my skin tone better than yesterday's, which really looked a little grey from certain angles and a little stark. This one's definitely looking a lot more suited to my skin tone, I think, than yesterday's. You know, there's obviously a big difference between the Jellyfish and the Snake palette, because the Snake is the deepest and the Jellyfish is the lightest. I wasn't interested in the medium palette, although in theory that should be the one targeted towards my skin tone, but it was almost all existing shades, so it just was like an easy pass for me. Although it may have been the best for my skin tone, I'd much rather have some new products than buy one that is full of re-promoted shades. So blush, I mean, I've got so many choices for blush. I don't even know where we're going to start. I have to say, this one is just screaming my name because it's so glorious and glowy. So I'm 100% going to use that one. This is the Sonia G Classic Cheek. I'm going to tap that off and I'm going to go pretty carefully. I think this palette would be glorious on much deeper skin tone than mine as well, because I'm kind of using these products lightly and doing a bit of blending, but you could absolutely build them up on a much deeper skin tone than mine. Potentially not the bronzer though. I think that's going to work on like a tanned skin tone. I'm not sure much deeper than that, but the blushes and the highlighter I think will look glorious on a deeper skin tone. So that is super pretty, really sheeny, and now I'm getting that Hourglass really super glowy all over look. You know, with this palette you could also use this finishing powder as a very subtle highlight because it has so much glow to it. So actually you've kind of got an option. You could use this as a really subtle glow, or you can use the metallic shade for a bit of a punchier highlight. I think I have to use this one on the other cheek. Oh, she's bright. Let's go. Oh, yeah, she's bright, she's pigmented, she's glorious. We have to be very careful. Obviously I only have the two cheeks, but I might just clean this brush off and try, now that we've seen these two blushes in action, I might see if we can just have a look at this blush at the top, the middle blush, over the top of that one to see. Okay, so that's definitely a bit more vibrant. It's kind of giving that sort of burnt look. Bit of a sunburny glow. Gorgeous. That's going to be stunning on deeper skin tones as well. Wow. So I'm just going to buff around the edges of everything on this side, just to kind of melt everything together. And then I'm going to really lightly use that finishing powder to buff around the forehead. It's definitely one that I can use all over the skin, this. I don't need to be as strategic as I was with the finishing powder from yesterday, which was too light and it was going to lighten my skin tone. This one is perfect for my skin tone, so I can not have to worry about using it too strategically, but I don't want to lose a lot of that glow. Again, because this finishing powder is that much more glowy, I'm not so worried about losing the glow from those cheek products. But as you can see, that's really helped sort of tone down the super vibrant blush, actually making me want to like add some more back because I was loving that vibrant blush. So pretty. Okay, so as expected, I'm obsessed, I'm delighted, I'm in love with this Snake palette. I think it's stunning. I love this glowy hourglass look, and I think adding the finishing powder, it kind of stops everything looking super shiny and it gives you more of a like sort of satin glow to the skin. So it's really up to you how you want to use that powder, if you want to use it. But I really like how this has kind of just made everything a smoother luminosity, really gorgeous glow. These blushes, I mean, you can layer them, you can play with them. They have a lot of like buildability. So if you have a deeper skin tone, I really think these blushes will build beautifully on tanned and deeper skin tones, or for like a more medium skin tone like myself. You just have to use them a little carefully, maybe a little bit of a buff after, and I think it'll be stunning. I think for a lighter skin tone, the highlighter is going to maybe leave a bit of a colour or a cast to the skin, and the finishing powder you'll have to be really careful with. The blushes you'd have to be extremely light-handed with if you wanted to use this palette on a really like fairer, lighter skin tone. But I think this is absolutely stunning, really quite versatile. I think the most versatile of the three palettes, because you've kind of got a choice of how you want to use the products, like the finishing powder being glowier, being deeper. I can use that as a highlight, I can use it all over, I can use it strategically. The bronzer, I love that that's got some luminosity. I love that we've got three glorious blushes with different levels of finish and luminosity, different tones. For me, this is it. Just like Tiger was it last year, this is the one from this year. But speaking of Tiger, do you already have Tiger and think this looks really similar? Do I need both? Do you have the Jellyfish palette? Are you wondering which is more for you? I'm going to do swatch comparisons of all of the products in these palettes so we can see, do you have something similar? Do you prefer something to this one? Let's get into some swatch comparisons. Okay, so first the bronzer from the Snake palette. Then we have the bronzer from the Jellyfish palette, much lighter, definitely not as glowy. Then we have the Ambient Lighting Powder from the Tiger palette, but this is, on me, a bronzer. So you can see, definitely the Snake bronzer is the deepest one that we've had to date. And that gorgeous luminosity. Next we have the bronzer from Elephant, and this is what I'm talking about, those super orangey, super warm bronzers. Elephant definitely ticks that box. Then we have the Sculpture bronzer and the bronzer from Unlocked. Very, very glowy, that one. So definitely the richest bronzer that we've seen in these palettes, so that's really good to see that it's not perfect for sure. It could have been deeper. We could have had a fourth palette, but it is the deepest I think we've seen so far. And it's definitely got a bit of that reddish undertone that I love, and a gorgeous glow that's not sort of too sparkly or shimmery. It's just gorgeous luminosity. So there we have the bronzers: Snake, Jellyfish, Tiger, Elephant, Sculpture, Unlocked. Starting off with the 3 blushes from the Snake palette, 2 blushes from Jellyfish, both much lighter, really not at all similar. I'll swatch the blush out of this one next to those. This is the Diffused Rose edit. I know that someone wanted to see this. So there it is, quite close actually to the first blush from the Jellyfish palette. Pretty close, but not close to this one. We then have the 3 blushes from the Tiger palette. I think one of these is classed as a highlighter, but they're blushes on my skin tone. These 2 are pretty similar actually. I think this one has maybe got a little bit of a sort of more coppery tone, and the Tiger one is very sort of orangey, but these are fairly close. Similar finish too. And these are the 2 blushes from the Elephant palette. Not really anything similar in there to the Snake palette. These are much more sort of a coral and a pink. Maybe that shade's a little similar to the first one, but not really. This one swatched is terrible, that's better. Definitely more berry versus sort of pink. Okay, so I'm going to wipe the rest of these swatches off and we'll compare it to the Sculpture and Unlocked palette so we have some more space. So again, we have the 3 Snake blushes, and these are the 2 blushes from the Sculpture palette. Very different, a sort of peachy coral and then a very light natural mauve. And then finally the blushes from the Unlocked palette, again much lighter, not really similar whatsoever to anything from the Snake palette. Okay, so moving on to highlighters, the highlight from the Snake palette and then the highlight from the Jellyfish palette, completely different. We've got gold and pink, and then there were 2 highlighters in the Tiger palette, one more subtle and one more gleaming. The Tiger palette again a bit lighter gold versus the sort of more bronzier highlight from Snake. Next we have the highlight from Elephant. We have the highlight from the Diffused Rose edit. Wow, that looks so light now, light and white. And then we have the highlighter from Sculpture and the highlight from Unlocked. So again, we have Snake, Jellyfish, Tiger, Elephant, the Diffused Rose, Edit, Sculpture and Unlocked. Quite a lot of variance there. The formula is very similar other than Sculpture, which is a more natural highlighter. Formula is very similar, but colours quite different. Okay, so as I expected, the Snake is definitely my favourite colour story of this year. I just think it suits my skin tone better. I can use everything in here and I will use everything in here. I think, you know, as I said in my review of the Jellyfish palette, I can't really use the finishing powders. They're a little too light for me. And the highlighter also was very much leaving a cast on my skin because it was a little too light for me. I think if you don't have any of these palettes and you're around my skin tone, around a medium skin tone, then in theory Leopard is the best palette for us, that everything is going to suit our skin tones, but everything in there, almost the whole palette, is existing repeated permanent shades. It only has one new blush in there, so to me it's just not really worth it if you have, like I do, a lot of palettes already. So for me, I'm super happy with this. I think it's beautiful. It's really like my tones, my colours that I love and I enjoy. As far as the blush, the bronzer is beautiful and it has the luminosity that I love. The highlighter suits my skin tone perfectly and I can use the blushes with a lighter, slightly lighter hand than I typically do, and they all look stunning. I absolutely love this palette. My favourite, I think, to date, prior to the Snake, was Tiger, and I think that is the most similar to Snake from the collection overall. This is Snake and this is Tiger. I think it's nice to see that the bronzer of Snake is a little richer than Tiger. I think the blushes are different enough and I like that we've got an extra one and we've got that finishing powder in there as well as a bronzer. It's just a little more versatile to me. I don't think there's necessarily a huge improvement as far as inclusivity. Yes, the bronzer's a little deeper than the finishing powder in here, but the kind of depth of blushes and highlights pretty similar, I would say. But they are definitely different palettes. Definitely some different blushes in there, and I think the highlight quite different as well. So as I said yesterday, whether or not you need or want this Snake palette or any of these palettes from Hourglass, if you already have a lot of them, is really a personal question. People absolutely love these palettes and just want to get them every year, and then there are other people who think, I've got one, I don't need any others, and some people who just aren't interested at all. What I would say is I do expect this Snake palette to sell out. Quite how quickly it will do that, I can't guarantee. I just don't know what their stock is like, but I would predict this will be the one that will go first and fastest, just because I think it's got the most new about it and it has that rich depth that we are always looking for from Hourglass, or it has it to a degree more so than the others. So I wouldn't hang about if you're desperate to get your mitts on these, but likewise I wouldn't get dragged into FOMO of thinking everybody else loves them and goes nuts for them and I don't really see it and I feel like I've got a few and I don't really need any more, and buy it because it's a really expensive item. It's nearly £90, it is $90. It's a lot of money for something that if you don't really treasure it and you don't get the hype, or you feel like you've already got. So I would just take a breather, have a cooling off period if you're sitting on the fence, and really think about whether you personally need it and will get a huge amount of joy out of it. I get a lot of joy out of these palettes. Face palettes, they really do it for me. They really tickle my pickle. I absolutely love them. They give me the most joy out of like most of my makeup. Face palettes are just, they get me right in the gizzards, you know? But if they don't get you, that's allowed, okay? You're not missing anything. If it's not for you, it's not for you, and that's okay. I hope you enjoyed this video and found it helpful, and I hope you've enjoyed this like week-long series of Hourglass palette videos over on my channel. We will be back to some other topic in my next video, so if you've been just not interested in this whole collection, I apologise for all of the videos, but a lot of people are super interested in these palettes, so I did want to be as helpful as I could, but there will be some other makeup product in the next video you see from me, I promise. But I hope you enjoyed these videos and found them helpful, and I would love to see you in the next one. Otherwise, take care for now. Bye 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 bye.